So here's a passage which Obama talks about fundraising and interacting with big donors and how he needs to get big donor money for his campaign. But in this passage, he emphasizes repeatedly, listen, I told these people, I'm not going to listen to you, special interests. I'm going to fight for the people. You're going to have no influence over me. So you can write me these giant checks if you want to, but it's not going to affect me at all. And this is the book that he's writing to shape his legacy. I want to compare that to something he wrote in a previous book, which was talking about fundraisers, which said the exact opposite, to his credit at the time. But now that he's, trying to rewrite history, literally, it's apparently the exact opposite. 8 years later, Obama, going to bigger fundraisers, has realized that they don't affect anything at all. And so he says in this book, in presidential politics, the best strategy means little if you don't have the resources to execute it. And this was the second thing that we had going for us, money. Given that the Clintons had been cultivating a national donor base for nearly 3 decades, our working assumption had been that Hillary would have a tremendous fundraising advantage over us. But the hunger for change in America was proving to be too strong, was to be stronger than even we had anticipated. And so it's the hunger for change that is powering his campaign's giant donations, even more so than Hillary's. All these all these all these rich people that are running the corporations, destroying America, aren't happy about it, and they want to change things. So they're giving their money away to someone who says, "I'm going to take away your power," and that's what's powering his campaign. So early on, our fundraising followed a traditional pattern. Big donors from big cities wrote and collected big checks. Penny Prizer, a businesswoman and longtime friend from Chicago, served as a campaign's national finance chair, bringing both organizational acumen and a vast network of relationships to the effort. Julia Smoot, our tough-talking and experienced finance director, built an expert team and had a gift for alternately sweet-talking, shaming, and sometimes scaring me into engaging in the endless hustle for dollars. She had a great smile, but she had the eyes of a killer. I grew accustomed to the drill, partly out of necessity, but also because as times went on, our donors came to understand and even appreciate my terms. This was about building a better country, I'd tell them, not about egos or prestige. I would listen to their take on an issue, especially if they had some expertise, but I wouldn't shade my positions to satisfy them. If I had a spare minute, the thank you notes I wrote and the birthday calls I made would be directed not to them, but to our volunteers and young staff. So he's not going to do anything special for them. And if I won, they could count on me raising their taxes. This attitude lost us a few donors, but helped develop a culture among supporters that wasn't about perks or statues. And anyways, each successive month, the makeup of our donor base was shifting. And then he talks about he's getting more small donations. Actually, he did get more small donations, but he's getting lots of big donations the whole time. He got more money from Wall Street than any other candidate, I think, in history at that point. And then actually what comes out of that? What comes out of that is as soon as he's elected, he gets a email from Citigroup because he chooses somebody from Citigroup to choose his transition team, which lays out all the executives which should be in his administration. And that's the actual effect of donors. So that's what Obama says now. He says that the donors don't actually affect him at all. Let's compare that to what he wrote. What he wrote in his in the last book. He says, I can't assume that the money chase didn't alter me in some ways. Increasingly, I found myself spending time with people of means, law firm partners and investment bankers, hedge fund managers, and venture capitalists. As a rule, they were smart, interesting people, knowledgeable about public policy, liberal in their politics, expecting nothing more than a hearing of their opinions in exchange for their checks, but they reflected almost uniformly the perspectives of their class, the top 1% or so on the income scale that could afford to write a $2,000 check to a political candidate, $2,000 check. They believed in a free market and in educational meritocracy. They found it hard to imagine that they might be any social ill that could not be cured by a high SAT score. They had no patience with protectionism, found unions troublesome, and were not particularly sympathetic to those whose lives were upended by the movements of global capital. Most were adamantly pro-choice and anti-gun and were vaguely suspicious of the deep religious sentiment. And although my own worldview and theirs corresponded in many ways, we had gone to the same schools after all, had read the same books, and worried about my kids in many of the same ways. I found myself avoiding certain topics during conversations with them, papering over then he talks about papering over possible differences, anticipating their expectations. On core issues, I was candid. I had no problem telling the well-heeled supporters that the tax cuts they would receive from George Bush would be reversed, which he just said there also. Whenever I could, I would try to share with them some of the perspectives I was hearing from other portions of the electorate, the legitimate role of faith in politics, say, or the deep cultural meaning of guns in rural parts of the state. Still, I know that as a consequence of my fundraising, I became more like the wealthy donors I met, in particular, in a very particular sense, that I spent more and more time above the fray, outside the world of immediate hunger, disappointment, fear, irrationality, and frequent hardship of the other 99% of the population, that is, the people that I'd entered in public life to serve. And in one fashion or another, I suspected that this is true for every senator. The longer you are a senator, the narrower the scope of your interactions. You may fight this with town hall meetings and listening tours and stops by the old neighborhood, but your schedule dictates that you move in a different orbit than most of the people you represent. And perhaps as the next race approaches, a voice within tells you that you don't want to have to go through all the misery of raising all the money in small increments all over again. You realize that you no longer have the cachet as you did as an upstart, the fresh face. You haven't changed Washington, and you haven't made a lot of people unhappy with difficult choices. The path of least resistance, of fundraisers organized by special interests, the corporate PACs, and the top lobbyist shops start to look awfully tempting. And if the opinions of these insiders didn't quite jibe with those you once held, you learn to rationalize and change as a matter of realism. Remember that, as a matter of realism. That's something he's going to talk about later, as something that he's adopted into his young idealistic framework of compromise, of learning the ropes. This is young Obama telling old Obama how he's going to sell out, and then this is old Obama forgetting that young Obama wrote this and realizing that historians are just going to write what old Obama wrote because they don't want to talk about the actual ailments within the system as a whole. The problem of ordinary people, the voices of Rust Belt, which just happened to be lost right after the Obama administration for the first time, which was once the Democratic stronghold town, or the dwindling heartland, became a distant echo rather than a palpable reality, abstractions to be managed rather than battles to be fought. And so that was very well put, and it's a good way of illustrating, very seldom is, like, when you go to a fundraiser, is somebody going to say, I will give you these $50,000 if you give me this, pork barrel spending or this special interest loophole in the next piece of legislation that you push. Rather, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to secede to the interests of your class and realize that if I'm against these policies in principle, globalization, tax cuts, any type of redistributive programs, if I throw too much, if I say I want to increase welfare benefits and Social Security and entitlements, or anything of that nature, then these people won't be coming to your fundraisers. And so, it's just a matter of, if you want to be a practical activist, like I said he was, or a pragmatist, then this is just what you have to do. And Obama has already said he wants to change the world by making sure that he becomes the president and he gets as much power as possible so that he can influence things. Well, if you want to do that, you have to be practical and you have to learn the ropes, as young Obama says to old Obama. So I think that was really well put. And it's interesting how, Obama knows all of this, but this just shows how dishonest he is, that he's going to completely change the narrative to something that he knows and wrote about years before when he did not have the political stature. You better believe that the fundraisers that Obama's going to now, or as he's running for president and becoming a favorite, are much larger and much more co-opting, and there's much more pressure than they were even as a senator. And so this is very, very dishonest.